Having been more than slightly traumatised by my last reading attempt, Malmesbury definitely was too much for me. I found that I was in a reading slump. I didn't have the mental elasticity left after the bludgeoning of Malmesbury's appalling writing to really take in a new book or anything fresh. I had looked through my to-read shelves, I just couldn't settle on anything, and eventually I did what we do in these circumstances and went back to an old favourite. You know, those comfort books that you return to when you don't need to be challenged, when you need to feel that the world is a cosy and kindly place that will treat you well. So back I went to a beloved book from my teenage years, The Lastborn of Elvinwood by Linda Haldeman. And that's where I came across the fascinating knowledge that this is a very, very underrated, unknown book. Goodreads has 7 reviews in total. I think only 46 people have even heard of this book, which is a great shame because this is a remarkably beautiful book. Of those 7 people who reviewed it, only one liked it as much as me, and they also discovered it when they were a lot younger. One of them thought it was an Arthurian book and was confused. It's not Arthurian, so I can see why he would be confused. I just can't see why he thought it was Arthurian. And the other ones, it wasn't what they expected. So let me tell you what to expect in this beautiful, beautifully written fantasy book. Let's look at that cover first. I really like this cover. I like the artwork style here. But this is one of those covers that actually tells you a surprisingly large amount about the book, and you probably want to see it without the reflection that's occurring there. So here we've got a beautiful pastoral, floral, vegetatively set scene. 2 characters stand in the foreground. One is your traditional beautiful fairy wearing a sort of tutu-like affair, blonde wavy hair, and she's staring down demurely, while a much larger, much more wild fairy type creature clad roughly in bark and with strange hair reaches out to her. In terms of covers that match the book, this one is staggeringly good and staggeringly subtle. Once you read it, the fact that the traditional fairy's eyes are downturned is central to the entirety of the plot. And the fact that the 2 of them look so different is the very core of it. Now, this is pure fantasy and it's fairy tale fantasy, but like other fairy tales, this is adult book. It is not for children. It is not meant to be a traditional type fairy tale. It is certainly not a traditional type mythos. It's very much modern day. However, if you're reading it in 2024 or onward, you will find the modern day is vintage, because this was written in the 70s, I do believe. I believe Linda Haldeman, who is an American author, which surprised me, only wrote 3 or 4 books. I've never found or heard of any of the other ones. I think I'd like to read them because her writing is beautiful. Okay, this one was copyrighted in 1978. So the scene of this is the 70s and it's in England. A small town, I think a couple of hours by train from London, called Elvinwood. And it is very, in a way, insular English. I'm impressed that an American managed to write a book that feels so very, very 70s England. It's so tidy, so polite, so English. Traditional style English. I'm not talking Dylan Thomas English, by the way. So it starts with a bonfire. The Forest and the Town, the first chapter is called, and it starts, "Please to remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason and plot." And it's the time of year for bonfires. And the people of the town are making this huge bonfire, which is traditional. The children have provided refreshments by gathering chestnuts from the national forest that abuts it. And among the visitors are a group of, and the American family. I don't think we ever know much more about them than the American family. There's a father who's taken a academic leave, and a mother. There's two boys, older boys, who are near enough in age to be considered twins. There's a toddler who's a little girl, and there's a baby who is also a girl. The way that this first chapter, with I think 8 pages, sets the scene is incredibly well done and incredibly subtle. So it talks about the American family was coming to see the bonfire, a matter of some satisfaction to the inhabitants of the estate, who were more than mildly curious about these visitors from abroad. A university professor with his wife and 4 children had leased the house at the top of Church Hill. And the American family are aware that they're visitors, they visit the bonfire, they enjoy it. But in the forest itself, there were other observers of the ritual, observers unknown to the people of the hill, observers who had often witnessed and wondered at the human magic that manifested itself each harvest tide in recent centuries. Every year it diminishes, remarked Garumta, the Fern Lord, to his aged mate, Anelan. I wonder if their powers are diminishing as well, he added, a faint spark lighting his deep-set green eyes. Not likely, Anelan retorted. They are probably just losing interest in the ceremony, whatever it is. Humans have a shockingly brief life attention span. So there we set it up. We've got this small, traditional, pastoral village in England, Elvinwood. We've got the national park right next to it. We know there's chestnuts in it, which are a major part of the plot. And we also know that in this wood live a race of fairies. Or at least we know that they're obviously not human. The Fern Lord sounds fairy-like. And you know what? The cover gives us a couple of hints. We next skip into town where the main character, chapter 2 is Midwinter Night. And it talks about the traditions of the pantomime in England. I'm old enough to have actually gone to a pantomime when I was very young. It's not a tradition that's really exported itself to Australia. Don't know about America. But in England it was big. Peter Pan is the traditional pantomime, and I actually went to one where the children are encouraged to clap their hands to save Tinkerbell. Again, a big part of this story. So, in Elvinwood, the villain was played, as all local villains were, by Ian James. With his face and profile, Ian James was destined to be an actor. His dark eyes glinted just enough. His long nose hooked downward just enough. His black hair receded from his forehead and curled at the nape of his neck just enough, and his beard was trimmed to just enough of a point to give him a memorable appearance, sometimes majestic, sometimes sinister, sometimes both simultaneously. Ian James is arguably our main character. He is an actor, not so much by profession as by inclination. He lives off a small inheritance in a small flat. He doesn't really have much of a life, but he seems to enjoy what it is. At the end of the pantomime, however, he is in the position of overhearing his friend the vicar's conversation with another member of the town, and they're talking about some mysterious thing they're going to do tomorrow night after the carols. I think it's carols. Yes. And Ian James, ashamed of himself, bewildered as to why he should be, follows them after the carols into the middle of the wood, where he sees both of them grab a chestnut off the ground, kiss it, and vanish. So when he finds a chestnut, he kisses it. He doesn't vanish, he diminishes to a tiny, tiny man. And that's how he discovers the court of the Fern Lord Garumta. I kind of don't want to say too much about this book, but I will say it centers around the fact that the fairies are diminishing because of human involvement, and there aren't enough young fairies. So it's decided by the various fairy courts that an exchange has to be done, an exchange between a fairy who volunteers to take the place of a young human, and that will create a change whereby a young fairy will enter the dying population of the Fern Lord and the fairies of Great Britain and its isles. The vicar ends up being a magician, but he's a student of a much greater magician. I guess that's where the whole notion of Arthurian comes in, because he ends up being a student of Merlin. Ian James, his blunder into the fairy kingdom almost cost him his life, but when the court of Oberon visits with his puck, Ian James is flushed out and forced to participate in the exchange. It's a slow builder of a novel. And like I said before, it's not a traditional fairy tale, and it's not traditional fairies, and it's certainly not what you'd exactly call urban fantasy, though it's probably a bit closer to that in feeling than what you'd expect. Despite the fact that you've got Oberon and Merlin, there's no Arthurian element. Where did that even come from? I don't know. But you have some wonderful characters, as well as Ian James and the vicar. You have the fairies, who themselves have their own very strong characters. You've got Grumta, who is old beyond the knowledge of humans, and you've got his youngest son, who is the Lastborn of Elvinwood, Mompen, who eventually volunteers bravely and terrifiedly to be part of the exchange so that young blood can come into the fairies. Mompen and Ian James form a friendship. It's a strange sort of friendship that's doomed to end when he becomes exchanged for a human, and the American family obviously feature in that quite significantly. I don't want to say anything more about the plot, except to say that I loved it. And it's the writing that will make or break this book for you. If you come into it expecting slow, gentle river of English country life with interspersed little peaks of strangeness of the fairies, and yet the fairies, while they are obviously strange and fantastical, they're written into the medley of the English Elvinwood town so well that they almost feel organically part of it. So yes, it's not remotely modern. It's written in the 70s. It feels like it could be older. It feels like it could almost be the 50s or 60s there. But the whole interplay of characters, plot, with this gorgeous writing is infinitely soothing and exciting. I've seen several people say they didn't know what to make of it. Can't comment. I've seen a couple of people say that they really didn't like the ending. The ending, I think, is its strongest point. It slowly builds up to the end of the exchange, and then it narrows down, and then we have an afterword. And the afterword, where the exchanged fairy, which we know as Mompen, comes back, is, as a human adult, is extraordinary. I felt it was deeply satisfying, but for someone who needs everything explained and all the I's crossed and all the T's dotted and everything, it may not be great. It relies on your imagination. It relies on the fact that you understand and enjoy the fact that no story ever has an ending. It only leads into the next story. So yes, The Lastborn of Elvinwood, a very beloved book that I've owned at least since the 70s, that I reread often, with some of the best writing of any classical fantasy that I can imagine. I do recommend it if what I have said about it sounds intriguing. I have to say, good luck finding it though. I had a look online while I was trying to find any more information about the author, Linda Haldeman, and all I found is she's American. She's got maybe 3 or 4 books. Or about The Lastborn of Elvinwood. I couldn't really find anything about either, and I didn't even have websites trying to sell me the book. That usually means there aren't too many of them out there. Anywho, thank you for listening to this review. It's a bit ravey, but it's one of those books that I know so well that you could probably lift up this, open it at random, read a little bit, and I'd be able to tell you exactly where in the book it was. It's got so many interesting themes, so much imagination, always subtle imagination, not frantic imagination, and the beautiful writing. So yeah, I'll stop now. Thanks for watching.